December 1876. 3 miles south of what would become Yankton, Dakota territory. Inside the dugout, the temperature held steady at 64 degrees. Outside, the mercury had dropped to 19 below zero. Astrid Lindstrom pressed her back against the earthen wall and felt warmth seep through her wool coat. The wall was alive with heat. Not the fierce, dry heat of a wood stove running hard, but something deeper, something patient. The kind of warmth that comes from mass, from weight from the earth itself, holding temperature the way a lake holds water. She was 16 years old. 43 days earlier, her stepfather had ordered her off his claim with nothing but the clothes she wore and her mother's Swedish Bible. The men who'd told her she'd freeze to death before January were huddled in their timber frame houses 3 miles north, burning through cord after cord of wood, watching frost climb their interior walls like ivy. She'd built the entire structure for $27 in materials. She sat now in the amber glow of an oil lamp, listening to the wind scream across the prairie above her head. The sound was distant, muffled, like hearing a storm through thick glass. The dugout shuddered slightly the way a ship shudders in heavy seas. But the walls held. The timbers held. The door 4 inches of cottonwood hung on leather hinges held. Nothing collapsed. Nothing failed. She opened her mother's Bible to the book of Ruth and began to read by lamplight. This shouldn't have been possible. A teenage girl with no construction experience arriving at the edge of winter with less than $300 her mother had hidden in that Bible. Money saved penny by penny from selling eggs to the fort. Most settlers with twice her resources and 10 times her experience were struggling to survive their first Dakota winter. The established homesteaders in the scattered community along the river bottoms had given her 2 weeks before she'd come crawling back, begging for mercy or accepting a marriage she didn't want. They were still waiting. Let's back up to November, to the day it all broke apart. The morning her stepfather remarried had been cold but clear. 6 months after her mother died of cholera, Jacob Morrison brought a new wife home to the claim. A woman from Sioux City with pale hands and a mouth like a trap. The new wife took one look at Astrid and understood immediately what the girl represented. Competition. For attention. For affection. For a share of the land when Jacob eventually died. She wanted Astrid gone. It took her less than a week to arrange it. Richard Whitmore was a widower from Sioux Falls, 47 years old. He'd buried 2 wives already and needed a third to cook and clean and bear children, before his own children from the first marriage grew up and left. He had money. He had land. He had respectability. Jacob saw it as a perfect solution. Astrid saw it as a trap that would close around her throat and never open. The conversation happened in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning while Astrid was kneading bread. Her stepfather stood by the stove. His new wife sat at the table, hands folded, face composed. "Richard Whitmore has made an offer," Jacob said. "He'll marry you, provide for you. It's a good situation." Astrid kept kneading. The dough was resistant, tough. It needed work. "He's a good man," Jacob continued. "Established. You could do far worse." "I could do far better," Astrid said quietly. The new wife's mouth tightened. "You're in no position to be particular. You have no prospects, no dowry. You should be grateful someone of Mr. Whitmore's standing would consider you at all." Astrid looked up, met her stepfather's eyes, saw nothing there but relief. He wanted her gone too. The new wife had worked quickly. "I'm not marrying him," Astrid said. Jacob's face hardened. "Then you're not staying here." "Fine." The word hung in the air between them like smoke. "You'll leave with nothing," the new wife said. There was satisfaction in her voice. "No money, no support. You'll come back within a week, begging." Astrid wiped flour from her hands, walked to her small room, came back with her mother's Swedish Bible. "I'll leave now," she said. She walked out that same hour. What the new wife didn't know was that Astrid's mother had been preparing for exactly this possibility for years. Every penny from egg sales that Jacob didn't know about. Every coin tucked away in the Bible's hollowed spine. $300. A fortune for a farm wife. A lifeline for a daughter who might need to run. Astrid discovered it the day after her mother's funeral. A note tucked in the book of Exodus, written in her mother's careful hand. "For when you need to build alone." Her mother had known, had seen what was coming, had prepared the only way she could. Astrid walked the 3 miles to Yankton with the Bible under her arm and the wind at her back. Filed a homestead claim under the name A. Lindstrom. The clerk was an old man with ink-stained fingers who didn't ask questions. Didn't ask if A stood for Astrid or Anders or Abraham. Just took the filing fee and stamped the papers. 160 acres. A quarter section. 5 years to prove up the claim by building a dwelling and cultivating the land. She chose her land carefully. Most of the other claims in the area were on flat ground, exposed. Timber frame houses standing like targets for every wind that came howling down from Canada. Some families had built sod houses, but they'd built them the way they'd built timber houses. 4 walls standing free, roofs sitting on top like hats, trying to hold back the weather through sheer stubbornness. Astrid had different ideas. She chose a south-facing hillside overlooking the Missouri River bottomlands. Good drainage, natural wind protection. The kind of spot that seemed obvious once you saw it, but apparently wasn't obvious to anyone else. The first person to challenge her plan was Magnus Thorvaldsen. He was a Norwegian homesteader, 42 years old, with a beard that hadn't been trimmed since he'd left Minnesota, and hands like axe heads. He'd been in Dakota territory for 3 years. He'd lost his first house to a prairie fire. The second one had collapsed under snow load. He was on his 3rd house now. A solid timber structure that had cost him $400 in lumber, freighted up from Sioux City, plus another 100 in labor. He was proud of it. He was also freezing in it. Magnus saw Astrid surveying stakes on the hillside, and rode over on a gray morning in mid-November. He pulled off his hat and looked at the stakes with the expression of a man watching someone dig their own grave. "You're wanting to build here." His Norwegian accented English turned every statement into something close to a question. "Yes, sir." She was learning not to volunteer information. Magnus studied the hillside, looked at her. A girl, 16, alone. "Into the hill?" he asked. 8 feet back, yes, sir." He scratched his head. "You understand the earth, it will collapse. The weight of the dirt. It will crush the roof. I'll use support timbers, and the roof angle will shed the weight. Timbers cost money. You have money for timbers, some. And you'll heat it how the smoke. Where does it go if you're under the ground?" Astrid explained her chimney plan. A stovepipe angled into the hillside at 30 degrees, running 9 feet through a clay-lined tunnel, before emerging 12 feet above the roofline. Natural draft from the angle and the earth's thermal mass. Magnus listened with the patience of someone humoring a child. "The cold air, it sinks," he said. "You'll be in a hole collecting all the cold. You'll freeze like a potato in a cellar." "The earth stays warmer than the air," Astrid said. Magnus laughed, not unkindly. "The earth is cold, girl. This is Dakota. Everything here is cold. You need thick walls and a good stove and plenty of wood. You need what everyone needs." He gestured at his own house in the distance. "Building into the ground. That's for root vegetables, not people." He rode off, shaking his head. Later that day, 2 more neighbors stopped by. Wilhelm Brandt was a German farmer who'd been a mason in Hamburg. He'd built his family a stone house, mortared tight. He considered it the finest structure in 20 miles. It had cost him 8 months of work and $370 in materials. He stood at the edge of Astrid's claim, with his arms crossed, studying her stakes like a problem in geometry. "The moisture," he said. His English was precise, clipped. "Underground, everything is damp. You will have mold. Your clothes will rot. Your food will spoil. Your lungs will sicken." He paused. "My cousin in Pennsylvania tried this. His wife died of consumption in 2 years. I'll ventilate," Astrid said. "And I'll angle the floor so water drains away from the living space." Wilhelm almost smiled. "You'll angle the floor. With what tools? What skill? You're what, 15, 16? 16. And you know how to grade a floor for drainage. You know how to calculate pitch. I was apprenticed for 4 years to learn such things. I'll figure it out." Wilhelm looked at her the way you'd look at someone insisting they could fly. "Pride before a fall," he said. "But you're young. You'll learn." He gestured south. "Come to my house when you're cold enough. We'll have space by the stove." The third skeptic that day was different. Reverend Ashford was an educated man from Boston, 48 years old. He'd come west to bring civilization to the frontier, which mostly meant holding church services in his parlor every Sunday and telling people how things were done in proper society. He'd built a respectable white-painted house that looked like it belonged on a Massachusetts village green. Never mind that the closest tree was 3 miles away, and the wind hit the structure like a fist every time the weather turned. "Miss Lindstrom," he said, standing at the edge of her claim with his hands behind his back. "I understand your circumstances are difficult, but this," he gestured at her surveying stakes, "this is not appropriate. Sir, a young woman living alone in a hole in the ground. What will people think? I don't know, sir. They'll think you're no better than a savage. They'll think you've abandoned Christian civilization." He straightened. "A proper home has walls and windows and a door that faces the road. It announces to the world that decent people live within. Your plan announces nothing but desperation." "Maybe I am desperate," Astrid said. Reverend Ashford softened slightly. "There are better solutions. The church community can help you find appropriate domestic placement. You're young and capable. A good family would take you in as help. In time, a suitable marriage could be arranged. I filed a homestead claim. It's legal. I plan to prove it up." The Reverend's sympathy evaporated. 5 years. You think you'll last 5 years in a dirt hole? The Homestead Act was written for families, for men with resources, not for... He stopped himself. The law may allow it, but nature won't. You'll be gone by spring and someone more suitable will claim this land. He left. Astrid went back to work. Here's something the skeptics didn't know. Astrid had been planning this since her mother died. She'd spent months watching how the successful settlers built, and more importantly, how they failed. She'd seen Magnus's first house burn because it was all wood and tinder dry. One spark from the stove was all it took. She'd seen Wilhelm's beautiful stone house sweat moisture because the stone was dense and cold and every bit of indoor humidity condensed on those walls. She'd seen Reverend Ashford's painted house shudder in the wind, watched him nail extra boards across the siding, watched his firewood stack shrink so fast he was buying more by December. But she'd also spent time with the native traders who still came through the area. They'd told her about earth lodges, warm in winter, cool in summer, built from materials that cost nothing but labor. She'd talked to an old French trapper who'd lived in a winter dugout for 20 years up on the James River, still alive at 73. No consumption, no rheumatism. And she'd read everything she could find. Farm journals, immigrant guides, even an engineering manual someone had left at the general store. But more than that, she'd been trained. Her mother's family came from Dalarna in central Sweden, where farmers had been building partly underground storage cellars for centuries. They kept root vegetables at stable temperatures all winter, never freezing, never too warm. Her father's people were from Schleswig, where they dug into hillsides for storm shelters. From the time Astrid was 8 years old, her mother had been teaching her to observe, not just to look, but to see, to watch how the earth behaved, how temperature moved, how water flowed. Watch how the cellar keeps the potatoes the same temperature all winter, her mother had said. cold outside, warm inside the house, but the cellar always the same. Why? Astrid had learned to ask why. Now she knew the answer. Construction took 19 days. She hired 2 teenage brothers, Karl and Otto Zimmermann, sons of a German family with too many sons and not enough land. 50 cents a day each. They thought she was crazy, but they liked the silver coins. They started on November 14th. First, they cut into the hillside, 8 feet back, then down 3 feet more, 12 feet wide, 16 feet deep, 9 feet of headroom at the front sloping back into the hill. The excavated dirt became building material. Dakota sod was perfect for this. Root systems woven tight by decades of blue stem and buffalo grass. You could cut it like blocks, stack it like bricks. It would hold its shape for generations. They cut 247 bricks, each one 36 inches long, 12 inches wide, 6 inches thick, 45 pounds apiece. Karl and Otto's arms nearly fell off. "This is killing us," Otto said on the 3rd day. He was 15, built like a fence post, strong but lean. "You can quit," Astrid said. "I'll find someone else." Otto looked at his brother. Karl shrugged. They kept working. The sod bricks formed a front wall, 28 inches thick at the base, tapering to 20 inches at the top. Behind it, a 2-foot air gap. Then an interior wall 12 inches thick. Dead air space, worth more than any fancy insulation. Air is a terrible conductor of heat. It doesn't want to move temperature from one place to another. Those 2 feet of still air trapped between the walls were worth more than 4 feet of solid earth. That was the secret Magnus and Wilhelm didn't understand. It wasn't about thickness alone. It was about creating barriers, layers, making heat work to escape. The roof was critical. Collapse would kill her faster than cold. 6 lodgepole pine timbers, 8 inches in diameter, spaced 30 inches apart. $9 freighted from the Black Hills. 1/3 of her total budget. But there was no compromise on structural integrity. She'd rather freeze than be crushed. The timbers spanned the width of the dugout, solid, immovable. They didn't even creak when Karl and Otto stood on them to test the load. Willow branches went across the timbers, then canvas for a few dollars, then 2 layers of sod 14 inches thick total, 3 tons of weight. The timbers didn't even notice. The roof angled at 2 inches per foot back to front. The back 3/4 of the roof sat under 4 feet of hillside, invisible from above. The earth provided extra thermal mass, extra insulation, extra protection from wind. The chimney was another carefully calculated piece. Cast iron stove salvaged for $12. Positioned in the back corner where heat would radiate through the entire space. The stovepipe didn't go straight up. It angled into the hillside at 30 degrees, ran 9 feet through a clay-lined tunnel before emerging 12 feet above the roofline. The angle created natural draft, The clay absorbed heat from the smoke, warming the earth around it, which warmed the dugout. Nothing wasted. Every component doing multiple jobs. 2 windows salvaged for a few dollars total, set deep in the sod walls. The 2-foot wall thickness created natural light wells. The deep-set windows wouldn't lose much heat because they were protected, shielded. The walls themselves blocked wind and radiated warmth inward. The door was 4 inches of cottonwood planks, hung on leather hinges that wouldn't freeze or rust. It opened inward so snow couldn't trap her. That detail mattered. A door that opened outward could be blocked by a single night's heavy snow. You'd be buried alive with no way out. The floor was the last piece. This was where Astrid proved she understood something Wilhelm Brandt had spent 4 years learning. The floor had to slope. Not much, just enough. 1 inch per 6 feet from the back wall toward the entrance. Imperceptible to walk on, sufficient for drainage. Water is patient. It will find every weakness, every low spot. If the floor was perfectly level, water would pool, would sit, would create dampness and mold and all the problems Wilhelm had warned about. But if the floor sloped even slightly, water would move, would drain toward the entrance where it would disappear into the earth outside. Astrid worked the floor herself, packed earth mixed with water and ashes, tramped hard, swept with fine sand. She used string and a level, and her own eye checking and rechecking the grade. It took 2 full days. On the morning of the 2nd day, Wilhelm Brandt rode by. He'd come to see how badly the girl was failing. Instead, he found her on her hands and knees, running string lines, checking pitch with a carpenter's level. He dismounted, walked over, watched. "Show me," he said. Astrid showed him the string lines, the reference points, the calculations. Wilhelm checked her work. 1 inch fall over 6 feet. The math was correct. The execution was precise. He straightened, looked at her. "Who taught you this?" "No one. You learned it from a book. I learned it from watching water." Wilhelm was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once and mounted his horse. He didn't say anything else, but something in his expression had changed. December 3rd, 1876. Completion. Total cost $27. Magnus came by that afternoon. He'd heard the construction was finished. He wanted to see what kind of death trap the girl had built. He walked around the structure, crouched down to examine the floor, studied the chimney placement, tested the door's weight, the leather hinges, the way it swung. Finally, he stood up and shook his head. "I'll give you credit. It's built solid. But you'll still freeze." His voice was certain, absolute. "The cold, it comes up from the ground. Mark my words." Wilhelm arrived an hour later. He didn't examine the exterior. He'd already seen the quality of her floor work. Instead, he stood at the entrance and spoke from horseback. "You've buried yourself alive. Come February, we'll be digging you out of there, dead from bad air or carbon monoxide. I've seen it before. Reverend Ashford didn't visit. He'd made his opinion clear. A girl living in a hole in the ground was beneath notice, beneath help. She'd made her choice. Let her face the consequences. Astrid moved in on December 4th. The first thing she noticed was the darkness. Those two windows didn't provide much light, especially with days getting short. She kept an oil lamp burning most of the time. That cost kerosene, but it also provided a little warmth. The space smelled like earth, rich, loamy. Some people might have found it oppressive. Astrid found it comforting, like being held by something larger than herself. The temperature inside with no fire at all was 51 degrees. Not warm, but not freezing, not even close. She built a small fire in the stove. Morning and evening. 6 pounds of wood per day. The temperature climbed to 62, 64, and stayed there. The thermal mass of the walls and the earth absorbed the heat, held it, released it slowly when the fire died down. She had 2 cords of wood stacked inside the entrance. At 6 pounds per day, that was enough for the entire winter with plenty to spare. Magnus was burning 30 to 40 pounds per day just to keep his timber house marginally habitable. The moisture issue turned out to be real but manageable. Astrid cracked the door open an inch every day for air circulation, even when it was freezing outside. That 1-inch gap let fresh air in, let moisture escape, let the space breathe. At night, she closed it tight. The thermal mass kept everything stable. No condensation on the walls, no mold. She tested the floor drainage one afternoon by pouring a bucket of water in the back corner. The water trickled slowly toward the entrance, following the grade she'd calculated. It disappeared into the earth long before it reached her sleeping area. The design worked. Everything worked. December 15th brought the first real test. A cold snap that dropped temperatures to 6 below zero for 3 straight nights. Astrid woke each morning to a dugout that measured 58 degrees. No fire burning overnight. She'd add wood to the stove, bring the temperature up to 65. That warmth would hold for hours. Meanwhile, Magnus was burning through a cord of wood every 4 days. His family huddled around the stove. The walls of his house were cold to the touch. Frost climbed the interior boards like ivy. Wilhelm's beautiful stone house was a tomb. The stone sucked heat from the air. His children slept in coats. Reverend Ashford preached a sermon about perseverance through hardship, while his congregation shivered in their pews. On the 3rd day of the cold snap, Magnus rode over. His face was chapped raw from the wind. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion from getting up 3 times each night to feed the stove. He'd seen the thin thread of smoke rising from Astrid's hillside chimney, barely visible. His own chimney was belching smoke like a fwoosh. He found Astrid outside splitting kindling. She wore just a wool sweater. She looked comfortable. Magnus dismounted, stood there, stared. "How much wood are you burning?" he asked. No greeting, no preamble. 6, 7 pounds a day. That's not possible. That's what I'm using. Magnus looked at the smoke, the thin wisp, then back at Astrid. The cold must be getting through somewhere. It's not. Show me. Astrid hesitated. Then she nodded. Come inside. Magnus had to duck to enter. The doorway was built for efficiency, not height. The warmth hit him immediately. Not the fierce, dry heat of a wood stove running hard, but a gentle, encompassing warmth that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The walls, the floor, the air itself. Everything was the same temperature. There were no cold spots, no drafts, no places where the wind found cracks and drove icy fingers through. It felt like being inside a living thing. God in heaven, Magnus breathed. It's warmer than my house. He walked to the back wall, pressed his palm against the sod. It was slightly warm, like skin. He looked up at the ceiling, the solid timbers, the sod layers above. He studied the floor angle, so slight he could barely perceive it. He crouched down, ran his hand over the packed earth, felt the grade, understood suddenly what Wilhelm had understood. This girl knew what she was doing. Magnus straightened, looked at Astrid. I was wrong, he said quietly. I told you it wouldn't work. I was wrong. You couldn't have known. I should have known. His voice was bitter. My grandfather in Norway. He built into hillsides. I remember visiting as a boy. Warm in winter, cool in summer. I should have remembered. He shook his head slowly. We come to a new land and we forget everything our ancestors knew. We think we're smarter because we have new tools, new ways. But you. He gestured around the dugout. You remembered. Magnus left without saying anything else. He didn't tell anyone what he'd seen. Pride is a powerful force, stronger than cold, stronger than reason. But he did stop predicting Astrid's failure. And late at night, when he woke to feed the stove for the third time, he thought about his grandfather's hillside home in Norway, about the warmth that had come from the earth itself, about the girl who'd figured out in 16 years what he'd forgotten in 42. The cold deepened as December wore on. Inside the dugout on the hillside, Astrid Lindstrom read her mother's Bible by lamplight and felt the earth hold her in its ancient, patient warmth. She was alone. She was 16. She had built something that worked better than anything the experienced men around her had constructed. And she had done it for $27. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the temperature held steady at 64 degrees. The skeptics were still waiting for her to fail. They would wait a long time. Christmas Eve, 1876. Astrid Lindstrom spent it alone in her dugout 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, listening to silence. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of insulation, of earth, of mass so dense that sound itself couldn't penetrate. Above her head, wind moved across the prairie. But down here, 8 feet into the hillside, wrapped in tons of sod and soil, she heard nothing but the occasional pop of wood in the stove and the soft hiss of her oil lamp. She'd cooked a small chicken. Someone had traded it to her for a consultation on roof angles. The smell filled the dugout, rich, savory. The kind of smell that made a space feel like a home instead of a hole in the ground. She set the table with her one plate, her one fork, her one knife, sat down, said grace the way her mother had taught her. Then she ate alone. When she was finished, she opened her mother's Bible to the book of Ruth and began to read. The story of a woman who'd lost everything, who'd been told to go back, to give up, to accept the life others had chosen for her. Who'd refused? Astrid traced her finger over the words. Her mother's handwriting filled the margins, notes, observations, little marks where she'd underlined passages that mattered. And tucked between the pages of Exodus, yellowed with age, was the note Astrid had found the day after the funeral. For when you need to build alone. She'd read it 100 times, but tonight on Christmas Eve, in the warmth of the structure she'd built with that hidden money, she understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. Her mother had been training her for this moment since she was 8 years old. Not just saving money, training her. The memories came back now with a clarity that took her breath away. Summer 1868. Astrid was 8. Her mother had taken her down to the root cellar. They dug into the hillside behind the house. Put your hand on the wall, her mother had said. Astrid had pressed her small palm against the earthen wall. Cool. Not cold. Not warm. Just cool. Constant. Now feel the air, her mother said. The air in the cellar was the same temperature as the wall, maybe 50 degrees. Comfortable. Still. Outside it's 90 degrees, her mother said. Inside the house it's 80. Down here, 50, Astrid said. Why? That was always her mother's question. Why? Because we're underground. Deeper. Think deeper. Astrid had thought. Because the earth doesn't change temperature fast. Her mother smiled. The earth has mass, weight. It takes a long time to heat up, a long time to cool down. The sun beats on the surface all summer, but 6 feet down, it's still cool from winter. And in winter, when everything above freezes 6 feet down, it's still warm from summer. She'd taken Astrid's hand, placed it on a potato. Feel. Same temperature as the wall. Same temperature as the air. All winter, these potatoes stay right here. Never freeze. Never sprout. Never rot. Because the earth holds the temperature steady. Like a battery, Astrid had said. Her mother had looked at her sharply. Where did you hear that word? The trader. He had a battery for the telegraph. Said it stores electricity. Yes, Her mother's voice had been intense, focused, exactly like that. The earth stores temperature. You just have to learn how to use it. That had been the first lesson. There had been dozens more. Winter 1870. Astrid was 12. A blizzard had hit. Her mother had sent her outside to check the animals. When Astrid came back in, her mother asked a question. Where was the wind coldest? Everywhere. It was freezing. Think, where did you feel it most? Astrid had thought back. When I was in the open, between buildings, when there was nothing to block it. And where was it less? Behind the barn, against the hillside. Why? Because something was blocking the wind. Mass, her mother had said. Mass blocks wind. Mass holds heat. Mass is your friend when you're trying to survive winter. Air is your enemy. Air moves. Air carries cold. You want to trap air. Make it still. Or you want to use mass to block it entirely. Lesson after lesson. How water drains downhill, always seeking the lowest point. How to calculate slope just by watching puddles form. How to read the sky for weather. How to tell good timber from bad by the sound it makes when you strike it. How to judge the strength of sod by the density of the root systems. Her mother never said, "You'll need this someday when you're thrown out and have to build alone." But she'd been saying it with every lesson, and the money. Penny by penny, egg by egg, year after year. Her mother had known what was coming, had known that Jacob Morrison's affection wouldn't survive her death, that a new wife would want the girl gone, that Astrid would have to run or be trapped in a marriage that would grind her down to nothing. She'd prepared the only way she could, with knowledge and money and the faith that her daughter was watching, learning, remembering. Astrid closed the Bible. She sat in the warm dugout her mother had made possible and felt grief and gratitude in equal measure. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 15 below zero. Inside, the temperature held at 63 degrees. Her mother was 6 months dead and still keeping her warm. December 26th, 2 days after Christmas. Astrid was outside splitting wood when she heard hoofbeats. A trader from Yankton. She'd seen him before. An old man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen too many winters. He pulled up his horse and looked at her dugout, at the thin wisp of smoke from the chimney, at Astrid, standing in a wool sweater comfortable in weather that should have driven her inside hours ago. "You're still here," he said. Not a question, an observation. "Yes, sir." He dismounted, pulled a tobacco pouch from his coat, rolled a cigarette with practiced hands. "Came to warn you," he said. "Blizzard's coming." Astrid waited. "Big one. Worst I've seen in 10 years, maybe longer. I've been reading signs for 20 years. Sky patterns, pressure changes, the way animals behave." He lit the cigarette, drew deep. "This one's gonna kill people. When Day after tomorrow, maybe sooner, it'll drop to 40 below. Maybe colder. Wind like you've never seen. 3 days. Maybe 4. He looked at her. Really looked. Seeing a girl. 16. Alone. You need to get to the settlement. Magnus Thorvaldsen or Wilhelm Brandt. They'll take you in. This isn't about pride. This is about surviving. I have food, water, fuel. Girl, his voice was hard. I've been through Dakota winters for 20 years. I've seen what happens when people get caught in storms like this. You'll be fine the first day. Maybe the second. But the third day, when the cold has gotten into everything, when the wind has found every crack, when your firewood is running low, and you can't see your hand in front of your face outside. He shook his head. Don't be one of the bodies we find in spring. I appreciate the warning. You're staying. Yes. The trader looked at her dugout again. At the hillside, the design. Something shifted in his expression. Not approval, just assessment. Your choice, he said. But I gave you warning. If we find you dead, that's on you, not me. He mounted his horse and rode off. Astrid watched him go. Then she went inside and took inventory. 37 pounds of cornmeal in a barrel by the back wall. 43 pounds of salt pork hanging from a rafter. 28 pounds of dried beans. 12 pounds of rice. 6 pounds of coffee. 58 pounds of winter squash in the cellar hole she dug behind the dugout. 4 chickens still laying despite the cold, sheltered in a lean-to against the south wall. 18 gallons of water in barrels. 3/4 of a cord of wood. Enough for weeks at her current consumption rate. 3 gallons of kerosene. She checked the chimney. Clear. She checked the door. Hinges solid. No gaps in the frame. She checked the ventilation gaps. 1-inch crack under the door. Small holes near the ceiling where she could adjust airflow. Everything was ready. 3 miles north, Magnus Thorvaldsen was buying extra wood from the fort. Paying premium prices because everyone else had heard the same warnings. Wilhelm Brandt was checking his stone walls, caulking gaps with clay, praying his family would survive. Reverend Ashford was leading prayers for deliverance. His wife was stocking the pantry with every scrap of food they could afford. Astrid Lindstrom went to bed early and slept soundly. December 29th. 2 o'clock in the morning. Astrid woke to a sound that wasn't wind. Wind has texture, movement. You can hear it change direction, gust and fade. This was a roar, constant, unvarying, like standing next to a waterfall. Like 1,000 trains running at once. The earth itself was screaming. The dugout shuddered. Dust filtered down from between the roof sods. Fine particles catching the lamplight as they fell. The walls vibrated. The door rattled in its frame. But nothing broke. Nothing failed. Astrid lit the lamp. The flame guttered in a draft she couldn't locate. She adjusted the wick, checked the room. The temperature inside had dropped to 54 degrees. That was significant. The wind was pulling heat through every microscopic gap, every place where sod met timber, where timber met earth. The structure was tight, but no structure is perfect. She built up the fire, added wood until the stove glowed. The temperature climbed. 56, 58, 60, 62. She checked the thermometer she'd hung near the door, the one that measured outside temperature through a small protected gap. 31 below zero, and still dropping. Astrid made coffee, sat at her small table, listened to the roar. She thought about Magnus, about his timber house with the boards that had blown off in lesser winds, about the gaps in his walls where wind would be driving through like knives. She thought about Wilhelm's children, about the little one Hannah, 6 years old, sleeping in a stone room that would never get above freezing once the cold really set in. She thought about Reverend Ashford's wife, about the painted house that shuddered in ordinary wind. Then she stopped thinking about them. There was nothing she could do. And thinking about what might be happening to others while she sat warm and safe felt like a kind of guilt she couldn't afford. She opened her Bible and read until dawn. Outside, the temperature dropped to 38 below zero. Inside, the temperature held at 62 degrees. Day 1 of the blizzard. Astrid maintained routine. She couldn't see outside. The windows were completely buried in snow, drifted over. The world beyond the door had ceased to exist. She had no way to know what was happening in the settlement, no way to communicate, no way to check on anyone. She was alone in a pocket of warmth while hell froze over above her head. She cooked cornmeal mush with salt pork, simple, filling. She used the cooking heat to supplement the stove, wasted nothing. She read. She maintained the fire. 6 pounds of wood, same as always. The thermal mass of the walls absorbed the heat and held it, released it slowly when the fire died down. The system worked exactly as she designed it to work. Mid-afternoon, she cracked the door open an inch to check the ventilation. The wind tried to tear the door from her hands. Snow blasted through the gap with the force of buckshot, stinging, blinding. The cold was like a physical presence trying to force its way inside. Astrid slammed the door shut, latched it, stood with her back against the cottonwood planks until her heart stopped racing. She would not be opening that door again until the storm passed. Night came early. Or maybe it didn't. There was no way to tell. The world was white and black and howling. She slept in her clothes, woke twice to add wood. The temperature inside never dropped below 56 degrees. Outside, 2 elderly men ran out of firewood. They burned furniture, burned floorboards, burned everything that would combust. It wasn't enough. They died sometime in the early hours of December 30th. Hypothermia. Their bodies wouldn't be found for a week. Day 2. The roar continued, unabated, relentless. Astrid woke to a dugout that measured 56 degrees. She built up the fire, brought the temperature to 64, made coffee, made breakfast, sat at her table and calculated how much wood she was using. 18 pounds over the first day and night. She had more than enough. She thought about the science she didn't know she was using. 6 feet underground, the earth held at a constant temperature. Right now, in December, that temperature was probably around 52 degrees. The earth had enormous mass. It didn't change temperature quickly. It couldn't. The physics wouldn't allow it. Above ground, air temperature could swing 80 degrees in a single day, from 40 above to 40 below. Air had no mass, no thermal inertia. It changed temperature the way water changes shape. But Earth was a battery, a reservoir, a stable reference point. Astrid's dugout was wrapped in that stability, surrounded by it. The tiny amount of heat she added from the stove wasn't fighting to warm air that was rushing away into the freezing night. It was maintaining equilibrium with a mass that wanted to stay at 52 degrees. Small input, stable output. That was the difference between survival and death. She didn't know the words, didn't know thermodynamics or thermal mass or heat capacity, but she understood the principle. The earth doesn't lie if you watch it carefully enough. Outside, the temperature hit 38 below zero again. Magnus Thorvaldsen's family huddled around their stove. They'd burned through 2 cords of wood already. Magnus had torn boards from the north wall to feed the fire, the wall where the wind had ripped away the siding the year before. Now the wind was coming through the gaps, howling through the house. They stuffed the holes with blankets, with clothes, with anything that would block the draft. His wife Anna held the youngest child, wrapped in everything they owned. The boy was shaking, not from cold exactly, from the effort of staying warm. His small body working overtime to generate heat that the house couldn't hold. "We should have listened," Anna whispered. Magnus said nothing. 3 miles south, Wilhelm Brandt watched his youngest daughter develop frostbite. Hannah, 6 years old. She'd been sleeping in the bedroom furthest from the stove. The room had never gotten above 30 degrees. Her feet had gone numb on the first night. Now they were white, waxy, dead-looking. Wilhelm wrapped them in cloth, held them against his chest, tried to warm them with his own body heat. He knew what frostbite meant. She'd lose toes, maybe more. Because his beautiful stone house built with 8 months of skilled labor and $370 in materials couldn't hold heat worth a damn. The stone was too dense, too cold. It sucked warmth from the air faster than the stove could provide it. He thought about the girl on the hillside, about her floor slope that he'd checked and found perfect, about the design he'd dismissed. Pride before a fall. His daughter would pay the price for his pride. Reverend Ashford's wife went into convulsions on the second night. Hypothermia. Her core temperature had dropped too far. Her body was shutting down. Ashford wrapped her in every blanket they owned, every coat, every scrap of fabric. He held her, prayed, willed warmth into her unresponsive body. The painted house shuddered around them. The wind found every crack, every gap, every place where boards met and weren't quite sealed. The house was beautiful, civilized, proper. It was also trying to kill his wife. He prayed harder. A young couple, newly married, tried to reach the settlement from their claim shack a mile out. They made it 50 yards before they became disoriented in the whiteout. The wind was too strong, the snow too thick. They couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't find their way back. They froze to death within sight of safety. Their bodies would be found holding each other. An infant 9 months old died in a drafty claim shack because her small body couldn't generate enough heat to maintain core temperature. Her parents tried everything, held her skin to skin, wrapped her in blankets, kept the stove roaring. It wasn't enough. The shack had gaps in the walls you could see through. The wind drove cold through those gaps like water through a sieve. 4 people dead, dozens more suffering, frostbitten, hypothermic, burning through every scrap of fuel, every piece of furniture, every reserve they'd built up for the long winter. And 3 miles south, in a dugout carved into a hillside, Astrid Lindstrom read her mother's Bible by lamplight and felt the earth hold her in patient ancient warmth. Day 3, December 31st. The wind stopped sometime before dawn. Astrid woke to silence, real silence, the kind that follows violence. The temperature inside was 56 degrees. She built up the fire, brought it to 64, made coffee. Then she opened the door. The snow had drifted 8 to 10 feet high against the hillside. Her carefully graded entrance was completely buried. She had to dig. She used a wooden plank as a shovel, cut through the drift, created a tunnel, crawled through. When she emerged on the surface, the world was unrecognizable. The prairie was gone, buried under an ocean of white. Drifts formed waves that looked like frozen surf. The sky was pale blue, clear, innocent, as if the last 3 days had never happened. The thermometer at the entrance, protected from the wind, read 42 below zero. Astrid stood in that cold for 30 seconds, felt it try to steal the warmth from her lungs, from her skin, from her core. Then she went back inside, crawled through the tunnel, latched the door, stood in the 64-degree warmth of the dugout, and felt her body remember what temperature was supposed to feel like. She'd survived. Not barely. Not through luck or desperation or the mercy of neighbors. Through design. Through understanding. Through principles she learned by watching her mother. By asking why. By paying attention to how the earth actually behaved. She made breakfast, ate slowly, thought about what came next. The settlement would be devastated. She knew that. The cold had been too extreme, the duration too long. People would have died, others would be injured, sick, desperate. She packed a basket, cornmeal, salt pork, coffee, what she could spare. Then she put on her coat and began the 3-mile walk to check on her neighbors. The snow was waist-deep in places. She had to pick her route carefully, following the ridges where the wind had compacted the surface, avoiding the drifts that would swallow her whole. It took 2 hours to reach Magnus Thorvaldsen's claim. His house looked like it had been attacked. Boards torn from the north wall. Snow drifted through the gaps. Smoke coming from the chimney, but thin, weak. The desperate smoke of a fire fed with scraps. Astrid knocked. Anna Thorvaldsen opened the door. Her face was gray, exhausted. Behind her, the children huddled around the stove. Magnus sat in a chair staring at nothing. "We survived," Anna said. "Barely. I brought food." Anna took the basket. Didn't say thank you. Didn't say anything. Just took it and closed the door. Astrid walked to Wilhelm Brandt's stone house. Wilhelm answered. His eyes were red, sleepless. "Hannah?" Astrid asked. "Frostbite. She'll lose 2 toes, maybe more." "I'm sorry." Wilhelm looked at her, really looked, seeing her comfortable, healthy, unharmed. "You were right," he said. "I was wrong. My daughter paid the price. I brought cornmeal and salt pork." Wilhelm took the food. "Thank you." He closed the door. Astrid visited 4 more families, brought what she could, checked on people, heard the stories. 4 dead, a dozen injured, everyone traumatized. And then she walked back to her dugout and waited. January 3rd, 1877. 3 days after the blizzard ended, Astrid was outside checking the ventilation holes when she heard hoofbeats. A man she didn't recognize, 30 years old maybe, well-dressed for the frontier, riding a good horse. He stopped at the edge of her claim, looked at the dugout, at the hillside, at Astrid. "Miss Lindstrom." "Yes." "Henrik Nordquist. I'm a schoolteacher from Wisconsin. Natural philosophy." He dismounted, walked closer, studying the dugout the way a man studies a puzzle he's determined to solve. "I heard about you. The girl who didn't freeze, who built something that worked when everything else failed. I need to see it." "Why?" "Because I think you've done something remarkable, and I think you don't even know what it is." Astrid studied him. He wasn't like the other men, wasn't skeptical or dismissive or condescending. He was curious, genuinely curious. "Come inside," she said. Henrik Nordquist ducked through the door. The warmth hit him the same way it had hit Magnus. immediate, encompassing, coming from everywhere. Fascinating, he breathed. He walked to the back wall, pressed his hand against the sod, felt the slight warmth radiating from the thermal mass. What's the temperature in here right now? 62 degrees. And outside, 8 below this morning. Henrik pulled a notebook from his coat, started writing. Do you know what you're doing? Staying warm. No. I mean scientifically. Do you understand the principles at work here? I understand that the earth holds temperature steady. That air doesn't. That if you surround yourself with mass, you need less fuel to stay comfortable. Henrik looked at her. You're using thermal mass. Do you know that term? No. Thermal mass is the ability of a material to store heat. The Earth has enormous thermal mass. Right now, 6 feet down, the temperature is probably around 52 degrees. In summer, it'll be the same. The Earth doesn't change temperature fast because it has so much mass, so much weight. He gestured around the dugout. Your structure is basically surrounded by a battery that holds at 52 degrees year-round. You just have to add a little heat in winter, remove a little in summer. Meanwhile, everyone else is fighting to heat air in wooden boxes that leak heat in all directions. He was writing rapidly now. Measurements, observations, calculations. There's a German scientist named Hermann von Helmholtz. He's been writing about energy conservation, about thermodynamics. You've just built a practical demonstration of his theories, and you don't even know it. Will it keep me alive? Astrid asked. It already has. And if you manage moisture and ventilation properly, it'll keep working for decades. He looked at her with something like awe. Did someone teach you this? No. I figured if root vegetables stayed the same temperature all winter, maybe I could too. Henrik stopped writing, stared at her. You discovered this empirically, by observation. I don't know what that means. It means you learned by watching, by testing, by seeing what worked and what didn't. That's how real science happens. Not in universities, not in books, in the field, by people who pay attention. He spent 3 hours in the dugout, measuring everything: wall thickness, roof angle, floor grade, chimney placement, wood consumption rates, temperature stability, 18 pages of notes. When he was finished, he looked at Astrid. I'm writing to the territorial newspaper. This needs to be shared. What you've built here, it's a solution to the fundamental problem of prairie survival. A family could build one of these for 1/3 of what they'd spend on a timber house. It would use 1/5 of the fuel. Children wouldn't die from exposure. Some people won't listen, Astrid said. No, but some will, and that'll be enough. Henrik Nordquist mounted his horse, tipped his hat. Thank you, Miss Lindstrom. You've taught me something today. Something important. He rode off. Astrid stood outside her dugout and watched him go. The sun was setting. The temperature was dropping. Soon it would be below 0 again. She went inside. built up the fire, made dinner. The earth held her. The walls radiated gentle warmth. The air was still and comfortable. Everything worked. Everything had always worked. She just had to trust what she'd learned by watching, by asking why, by paying attention to the way the world actually behaved, instead of accepting what men told her should be true. Outside, the Dakota winter continued its assault. Inside, Astrid Lindstrom was warm. And somewhere in Yankton, Henrik Nordquist was writing an article that would change everything. January 18th, 1877. The Dakota Free Press ran Henrik Nordquist's article on page 3 between grain prices and territorial legislature news. The headline read, "A thermally efficient dwelling for prairie settlement. No sentiment, no drama, just data." Henrik had written it the way a scientist writes. Temperature comparisons, wood consumption rates, construction costs broken down to the penny, exact specifications so precise that anyone with basic tools could replicate the design. Wall thickness 28 inches outer, 2-foot air gap, 12 inches inner. Roof angle 2 inches per foot. Floor grade 1 inch per 6 feet. Chimney 30-degree angle 9 feet through clay line tunnel. Total cost $27. Performance during the December blizzard. Interior temperature maintained between 56 and 64 degrees, while exterior temperature reached 42 below zero. Wood consumption 6 pounds per day versus 30 to 40 pounds for conventional timber structures. 4 deaths in the settlement. 0 deaths in earth-sheltered dwelling. The article didn't mention Astrid's age. Didn't mention she was a woman. Didn't mention she'd been thrown out by her stepfather, or that she'd built the structure alone with 2 teenage laborers. It just presented the facts. Sometimes facts are enough. By February, 3 families had written to the newspaper, asking how to contact the builder. By March, the number had grown to 12. By the time the snow melted in April 17, families wanted consultations. Astrid charged $5 per visit. That price was scandalous. A woman. A girl, really. Charging men for advice on construction, on engineering, on matters that belong to the realm of masculine expertise. Some men refused on principle. Wouldn't take instruction from a female no matter how sound the design. Their families would pay the price the following winter. But others came, desperate enough or humble enough or smart enough to recognize that survival mattered more than pride. Astrid rode out to each claim, studied the land, the hillsides, the drainage, the wind patterns, the soil composition. She didn't offer a single design, didn't hand out blueprints. Each structure had to be adapted to local conditions, to family size, to available materials. A family of 8 needed different dimensions than a couple. A claim with clay soil needed different waterproofing than one with sandy loam. A north-facing slope required different ventilation than a south-facing one. She taught principles, then let families customize. The first consultation was with a young couple from Nebraska who'd heard about the article through a relative. They'd tried to homestead in a canvas tent, lost everything in the blizzard. Their infant daughter had nearly died. Astrid spent 6 hours with them, showed them how to read the land, how to calculate slope, how to determine where the water table sat, how to test sod for structural integrity. "Why the air gap?" the husband asked. His name was Thomas, 23 years old, carpenter from Ohio who'd come west with dreams and found only cold. "Air doesn't conduct heat well," Astrid said. "It's lazy. Doesn't want to move temperature from one place to another. So you trap it between two walls. Make it work for you instead of against you. And the floor slope, eh? Water always wins, always. You can't stop it, but you can control where it goes. Give it a path. Make it drain away from where you sleep." Thomas wrote everything down. His wife, Sarah, asked about ventilation, about moisture management, about how to know if the chimney angle was correct. Astrid answered every question, showed them her own dugout, let them feel the temperature stability, see the dry walls, touch the solid timbers that had held 3 tons of sod through the worst blizzard in a decade. They paid her $5, built their structure in May, moved in by June. The following winter, they stayed comfortable while their neighbors froze. Magnus Thorvaldsen came to her in late April. He didn't ride up to the dugout, didn't announce himself. Just appeared one morning while Astrid was checking her chickens. He stood there, hat in hands. A man who'd spent 3 years telling everyone the girl would fail, who'd lost his first 2 houses to fire and snow, who'd nearly lost his family in the blizzard. "I want to rebuild," he said. Astrid waited. "Not tear down, can't afford that, but modify, using your methods, if you'll help." $5. I know. She spent the afternoon at his claim. The house was salvageable, barely. The north wall would need to be completely reconstructed, but the foundation was solid. "Dig down 2 feet, Astrid said, along the northeast and west walls, then build earth berms, bank the soil against the walls up to the roof line. Leave the south wall clear for light and access. I'll lose half my windows. You'll keep all your heat." Magnus looked at his house, at the gaps in the north wall where he'd torn boards for fuel, at the places where frost had climbed the interior walls like a disease. "How much will it cut my wood consumption?" "Half, maybe more." He paid her $5, started digging the next day. Wilhelm Brandt came 3 days later. He brought his daughter Hannah, the 6-year-old who'd lost 2 toes to frostbite. She walked with a limp now, would for the rest of her life. Wilhelm didn't make small talk, didn't offer justifications, just asked his question. "The stone holds cold. I know that now. Can it be fixed?" Astrid studied his house from horseback. Beautiful construction, perfect mortaring, 8 months of skilled labor, completely wrong for the climate. "Build an interior wall," she said. "Sod, 12 inches thick, 3 feet inside your existing stone wall. all the way around. Leave a 3-foot air gap between them. That'll make the rooms smaller. It'll make them livable. Wilhelm did the math in his head. The sod will absorb moisture from the interior air. Keep it from condensing on the stone. Yes. And the air gap will insulate. Yes. He looked at his daughter, at her ruined feet, at the price of his pride written in her uneven gait. I should have listened to you in November. You're listening now. Wilhelm paid her $5, publicly acknowledged her influence when his neighbors asked why he was tearing apart his beautiful stone rooms. Some of them mocked him, called him foolish, said he was taking advice from a girl who'd gotten lucky. The following winter, Wilhelm's family was comfortable. The mockers were freezing. Not everyone came. Reverend Ashford left for Massachusetts in early May. Before he departed, he rode out to Astrid's dugout one final time. His wife had survived the blizzard. Barely. She'd spent 3 weeks recovering. Weak. Traumatized. Determined never to face another Dakota winter. I was wrong about you, Ashford said. He sat straight in the saddle, formal even in admission of error. I thought you were being foolish. I didn't understand that you were being wise. Thank you. There's a difference between formal education and genuine intelligence, between credentials and capability. I learned that this winter, at significant cost. He looked at the dugout, at the structure he'd called uncivilized, primitive, beneath Christian dignity. Your families are alive because you were smart, he said. Mine nearly died because I was arrogant. That's a lesson I won't forget. He rode away. Astrid never saw him again. By summer 17, structures were under construction based on her consultations. Every single one adapted to local conditions, to family needs, to available materials. A widow with 3 sons built a dugout into a creek bank, used the constant water flow for cooling in summer. A German family of 10 built a structure twice the size of Astrid's, with separate sleeping rooms and a central gathering space. Cost them $43. Would have cost $300 for equivalent timber construction. A Norwegian bachelor built a small version, just big enough for one. Spent $18 total. Stayed warm all winter burning driftwood he collected from the river. Each structure worked. Each family survived. Winter 1877 to 78 proved the concept beyond doubt. That winter was longer than the previous one. Colder in some ways. The cold spells lasted for weeks instead of days. Snow fell heavier. Supply lines from Sioux City were cut for a month. Families in traditional houses suffered. 40% faced critical wood shortages. They'd calculated their fuel needs based on the previous winter. Hadn't accounted for longer duration. Colder, sustained temperatures.